Man returns wallet with $50,000 and receives shocking reward from billionaire owner. In a world where honesty often goes unrewarded, one man's simple act of integrity sets off a chain of events that will change his life forever. When down on his luck, Jack Henderson stumbles upon a wallet stuffed with cash. He faces a choice that will test his morals and alter his destiny. Little does he know, the wealthy owner has much more in store for him than a mere thank you. Jack Henderson trudged down the rain-slicked streets of New York City, his worn shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon lights of the bustling metropolis. At 35, Jack's weathered face told the story of a man who had seen better days. His calloused hands, stuffed deep in the pockets of his threadbare jacket, were a testament to years of hard labor that had led him nowhere. As he walked, the weight of his recent layoff from the construction site hung heavy on his shoulders. The company's downsizing had left him jobless, with rent due and his savings dwindling faster than he could blink. Each step seemed to echo the rhythm of his worried thoughts. What now? What now? Lost in his anxious musings, Jack almost missed the sleek leather object lying in a shadowy corner of a less-traveled alley. His foot nudged it and he bent down to investigate. As his fingers closed around the smooth surface, he realized it was a wallet. And not just any wallet. This one practically screamed luxury. With trembling hands, Jack opened it, his eyes widening at the sight of crisp $100 bills neatly stacked inside. A quick count confirmed what he could scarcely believe. $50,000 in cash, right there in his hands. For a moment, the world around him faded away. The constant city noise became a dull hum as his mind raced with possibilities. This money could solve all his problems, pay off his debts, cover rent for months, maybe even start the small business he'd always dreamed of. But as quickly as the thought came, guilt washed over him. Jack had always prided himself on his integrity, a value instilled by his late father. A man's word is his bond, son. His father's voice echoed in his memory, and his actions define his character. Jack's internal struggle was interrupted by a buzzing from within the wallet. He fished out an expensive-looking smartphone, its screen lighting up with an incoming call. The caller ID read home. His heart pounding, Jack stared at the phone. This was his chance to do the right thing, to return the wallet to its rightful owner. But the temptation of the money whispered seductively in his ear, reminding him of his desperate situation. As the phone continued to buzz insistently in his hand, Jack stood frozen in the alley, caught between his moral compass and the weight of his circumstances. The choice he was about to make would set in motion a series of events he could never have anticipated, forever altering the course of his life and the lives of those around him. With a deep breath, Jack's finger hovered over the screen. In that moment, standing alone in the rain-soaked alley, Jack Henderson was about to answer a call that would change everything. Jack's finger trembled as it hovered over the buzzing phone. In a split-second decision that would alter the course of his life, he swiped to answer the call. "Hello?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, thank God!" A woman's voice, tinged with relief and anxiety, came through the speaker. "I've been calling nonstop. Please, tell me you've found my husband's wallet." Jack swallowed hard, his conscience battling with his desperation. "Yes, ma'am. I have it right here." "Oh, bless you," the woman exclaimed. "My husband, he's not been himself lately. He went out for a walk to clear his head and must have dropped it. There's a lot of cash in there. It's very important." The genuine worry in her voice tugged at Jack's heartstrings. He found himself asking, "Is everything okay? With your husband, I mean?" There was a pause on the other end. "He's been under a lot of stress lately. Business troubles. The money in that wallet. It's complicated, but it's our last hope to fix things." Jack's mind raced. The woman's words painted a picture of another family in trouble, perhaps not so different from his own situation. He thought of his own struggles, of the temptation to keep the money. But hearing the distress in this stranger's voice solidified his resolve. "I understand, ma'am," Jack said, his voice steadier now. "I'd like to return the wallet. Can we arrange a meeting?" The relief in the woman's voice was palpable. "Yes, of course. Our driver can pick you up. Where are you?" Jack gave her his location, and she assured him someone would be there within 30 minutes. As he ended the call, a mix of emotions washed over him, pride in his decision, tinged with a hint of regret at the opportunity lost. True to the woman's word, a sleek black car pulled up precisely half an hour later. The driver, a stern-faced man in a crisp suit, ushered Jack into the back seat without a word. As they drove through the glittering streets of Manhattan, Jack clutched the wallet, his mind swirling with questions. Who were these people? What kind of business troubles required $50,000 in cash? The car eventually pulled up to a towering skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. Jack's eyes widened as he realized this was One World Trade Center, one of the most expensive and exclusive addresses in the city. The driver led him through a private entrance and into an elevator that whisked them up to the 100th floor. As the doors opened, Jack stepped into a world he'd only seen in movies, a vast penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city below. A woman in her early 50s, elegantly dressed but with worry lines etched on her face, hurried towards him. "You must be Jack," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret Blackwood. Thank you so much for coming." Jack shook her hand, feeling increasingly out of place in his worn clothes. "It's no problem, ma'am. I'm just glad I could help." He handed over the wallet, watching as Margaret clutched it tightly, relief flooding her features. "My husband will want to thank you personally," Margaret said, gesturing for Jack to follow her deeper into the apartment. "He should be back any moment now." As they walked, Jack couldn't help but notice signs of recent turmoil, papers strewn about, half-packed boxes in corners. Whatever troubles the Blackwoods were facing, they seemed to be prepared for significant changes. Suddenly, the elevator dinged, and Margaret turned, her face lighting up. "Ah, here he is now." Jack turned to greet the man he assumed would be Mr. Blackwood, but the sight that met his eyes made him freeze in shock. Standing before him was one of the most recognizable faces in America, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and power. In that moment, Jack realized that his simple act of honesty had entangled him in a web far more complex than he could have ever imagined. The man extending his hand wasn't just any billionaire. He was the billionaire, the one whose face had been splashed across every newspaper and magazine in recent weeks, embroiled in a scandal that had rocked Wall Street to its core. Jack Henderson, unemployed construction worker, found himself shaking hands with none other than Robert Blackwood, the most controversial figure in American finance. Robert Blackwood's piercing blue eyes locked onto Jack's, his firm handshake betraying a strength that belied his 60 years. "So you're the Good Samaritan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Henderson, sir." "Jack Henderson," Jack managed to reply, still reeling from the realization of who stood before him. Blackwood nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Mr. Henderson, you've done me a greater service than you could possibly imagine. Please join me in my study. We have much to discuss." As they walked, Jack couldn't help but notice the opulence surrounding him, priceless artworks adorning the walls, furniture that probably cost more than he'd ever made in a year. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, as if the very apartment was holding its breath. The study was a masculine space of rich mahogany and leather, with a panoramic view of the New York skyline. Blackwood gestured for Jack to take a seat across from him at a massive desk. "I'm sure you're wondering why there was so much cash in that wallet," Blackwood began, his tone measured. "The truth is, Mr. Henderson, I'm in a precarious situation, one that requires discretion." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, if this is something illegal Blackwood held up a hand, cutting him off. "Nothing of the sort, but it is a matter of utmost sensitivity." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Tell me, Mr. Henderson, what do you know about my current predicament?" Jack hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. "Only what I've seen in the news, sir. There are allegations of insider trading, talks of an SEC investigation. They're saying your company might not survive the scandal. Blackwood nodded grimly. The vultures are circling, Mr. Henderson. Years of work, thousands of jobs, all at risk because of a mistake. A lapse in judgment that I'm trying desperately to correct. He stood, walking to the window. That money you found? It's part of a plan to save not just my company, but the livelihoods of countless employees who depend on it. I need to make a deal off the books to secure evidence that will exonerate me and the company. But I can't use official channels. The eyes of the world are upon me, every transaction scrutinized. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This was far bigger than anything he'd ever been involved in. Mr. Blackwood, I'm just a construction worker. I don't see how I can help with something like this. Blackwood turned, a glimmer of something desperation, hope, in his eyes. But that's precisely why you're perfect, Mr. Henderson. You're unknown, unconnected to me or my world. I need someone I can trust, someone who's proven their integrity, to be my proxy in this matter. He returned to his desk, pulling out a briefcase. I'm prepared to offer you a job, Mr. Henderson. A very well-paid, albeit temporary and highly confidential position. You'll be my personal assistant, my go-between for some very delicate negotiations. In return, I'll ensure you're compensated handsomely, enough to set you up for life. Jack's mind reeled. The offer was beyond tempting, a chance to solve all his financial woes in one fell swoop. But the risks? This sounds dangerous, Mr. Blackwood, and, forgive me for saying so, but how do I know I can trust you? The allegations against you are just that, allegations, Blackwood interjected firmly. I've made mistakes, Mr. Henderson, but I'm not the monster the media paints me to be. I'm fighting not just for myself, but for the thousands who rely on my company for their livelihoods. All I'm asking is for your help in righting a wrong. He opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of cash. Consider this a down payment. $500,000, tax-free. Help me, Mr. Henderson, and there's much more where this came from. Jack stared at the money, his heart pounding. This was it, a crossroads moment. On one side, a return to his life of struggle and uncertainty. On the other, a chance at financial security, but at what cost? As he looked up at Blackwood's expectant face, Jack knew his next words would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, the ticking of an antique clock on the desk marking each moment of his hesitation. In that opulent study, high above the city he called home, Jack Henderson prepared to give an answer that would plunge him into a world of high-stakes finance, dangerous secrets, and moral ambiguity. A world he never imagined he'd be part of. Jack's palms were sweaty as he stared at the briefcase full of cash. The room seemed to spin around him, Blackwood's intense gaze boring into him. After what felt like an eternity, Jack took a deep breath and spoke. Mr. Blackwood, I'll do it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. No surprises. Blackwood's face broke into a relieved smile. Of course, Mr. Henderson. I wouldn't have it any other way. He closed the briefcase and pushed it towards Jack. This is yours now. Consider it a signing bonus. Jack's hand trembled as he reached for the handle. The weight of it, both literal and figurative, was almost overwhelming. Blackwood continued, his tone businesslike. Here's what I need from you. There's a man, Trevor Sinclair. He has information documents that can prove my innocence. But he's scared, doesn't trust anyone associated with me or my company. That's where you come in. He pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the desk. Inside you'll find all the details. Where to meet Sinclair, what to say, how to handle the exchange. You'll be making the drop tomorrow night. Jack's eyes widened. Tomorrow? That's so soon. Time is of the essence, Mr. Henderson. Every day the scandal drags on, more damage is done. Blackwood's voice softened slightly. I know this is a lot to take in, but remember, you're not just helping me. You're helping thousands of employees and their families. Jack nodded slowly, trying to process everything. What about my job? My apartment? All taken care of, Blackwood assured him. As far as anyone knows, you've been hired as my personal assistant. We'll provide you with a new wardrobe, a company car, and a suite at the plaza for the duration of your employment. Your old landlord will be informed that you've moved out, with all dues settled. The rapid transformation of his life left Jack reeling. Just hours ago, he had been worrying about making rent. Now, he was sitting on $500,000 and about to stay in one of New York's most luxurious hotels. One more thing, Blackwood added, his tone grave. Absolute discretion is crucial. You can't tell anyone about this, not friends, not family. As far as the world is concerned, you're just my new assistant. Understood. Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Yes, sir. I understand. Good, Blackwood said, standing up. Margaret will show you out. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning to bring you to your new accommodations. As Jack stood to leave, briefcase in hand, Blackwood called out one last time. Mr. Henderson? Thank you. You have no idea how much this means. The ride back to his apartment was a blur. Jack clutched the briefcase to his chest, half expecting to wake up at any moment. But as he entered his dingy one-bedroom apartment, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He opened the briefcase again, running his fingers over the stacks of bills. It was more money than he'd ever seen in his life. But as the initial euphoria faded, a creeping sense of unease settled in his stomach. What had he gotten himself into? Was Blackwood really innocent? Or was Jack now complicit in something far more sinister? And who was this Trevor Sinclair? With shaking hands, Jack opened the manila envelope. Inside were detailed instructions, a burner phone, and a photo of a middle-aged man with a worried expression, presumably Sinclair. As he read through the documents, the gravity of his task became clear. He wasn't just passing along information. He was stepping into a high-stakes game of corporate espionage and legal maneuvering. Jack's eyes fell on a framed photo of his parents on the bedside table. His father's words echoed in his mind. Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. But what was the right thing in this situation? Was he helping to right a wrong, or was he being used as a pawn in a billionaire's game? As the night wore on, Jack tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Tomorrow, he would step into a new life, one filled with luxury, but also danger and moral ambiguity. Little did he know, the meeting with Trevor Sinclair would be just the beginning of a journey that would test his integrity, challenge his beliefs, and push him to limits he never thought possible. As the first light of dawn crept through his window, Jack Henderson prepared to leave his old life behind and step into a world he barely understood, a world where every choice could have life-altering consequences. The morning sun had barely risen over the New York skyline when a sleek black Audi pulled up in front of Jack's apartment building. He descended the stairs, a small duffel bag containing his meager possessions slung over his shoulder, the weight of the briefcase filled with cash still foreign in his hand. The driver, a taciturn man in a crisp suit, nodded curtly as Jack slid into the back seat. Good morning, Mr. Henderson. We'll be heading to the plaza first for your check-in, then to the tailor for your new wardrobe. As they wove through the awakening city, Jack's mind raced. The familiar streets of his neighborhood gave way to the opulent avenues of Midtown, and he felt like a stranger in his own city. The Plaza Hotel loomed before them, its French Renaissance-style architecture a stark contrast to the modern skyscrapers surrounding it. Jack felt woefully out of place as he was ushered through the gilded lobby, acutely aware of his worn jeans and scuffed work boots. Welcome to the plaza, Mr. Henderson. The impeccably dressed concierge greeted him with a practiced smile. Mr. Blackwood has arranged for our finest suite for your stay. Please, allow me to show you up. The suite was larger than Jack's entire apartment, with a stunning view of Central Park, plush carpets, antique furniture, and a marble bathroom with gold fixtures. It was a world away from anything he'd ever experienced. Your new wardrobe will be delivered this afternoon, the concierge informed him. In the meantime, Mr. Blackwood has requested that you visit our in-house tailor for immediate fittings. He's expecting you in an hour. Left alone in the suite, Jack sank into a plush armchair, his head spinning. He pulled out the burner phone Blackwood had provided, seeing a text message notification. Everything going smoothly? Remember, meeting with S tonight at 8. Location in the envelope. Stay focused. RB. The reality of his situation came crashing back. This wasn't a dream or a vacation. He had a job to do, one that carried enormous stakes. An hour later, Jack found himself standing awkwardly in the hotel's bespoke tailor shop, being measured and fitted for suits that cost more than he used to make in a month. Mr. Blackwood was quite specific about your wardrobe needs. The tailor, an older Italian man named Giorgio, explained as he worked. We're rush ordering everything: suits, shirts, ties, shoes. You'll look like a proper executive by this evening. As Giorgio worked his magic, Jack caught glimpses of himself in the mirror. With each new piece of clothing, he saw less of the construction worker from Queens and more of someone else. Someone who belonged in the world of Robert Blackwood. By late afternoon, Jack hardly recognized himself. Gone was the scruffy, down-on-his-luck laborer. In his place stood a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and Italian leather shoes. His hair had been cut and styled, his rough hands manicured. Back in his suite, surrounded by boxes and garment bags filled with his new wardrobe, Jack stared at his reflection in the full-length mirror. "Who are you?" he whispered to himself. The burner phone buzzed again. "Car will pick you up at 7:30 for the meeting. Remember the details. Trust no one but Sinclair. Good luck. RB." Jack's stomach churned with anxiety. In just a few hours, he would be making the drop, playing a role in a high-stakes game he still didn't fully understand. He reached for the manila envelope, reviewing the information one last time. Trevor Sinclair, former employee of a rival firm, now turned whistleblower. The documents he possessed allegedly proved that Blackwood had been set up, that the insider trading accusations were part of a larger conspiracy. As the sun began to set over Central Park, casting long shadows across his lavish suite, Jack Henderson prepared himself for the evening ahead. He adjusted his tie, slipped the envelope with the cash for Sinclair into his inside pocket, and took a deep breath. In just a few short hours, he had transformed externally. But as he stared at his reflection, he wondered, had he changed on the inside too? Was he still the man of integrity his father had raised him to be? As he headed down to meet the waiting car, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far more dangerous and complex than he had initially realized. The glittering lights of New York City beckoned, promising wealth and opportunity, but also concealing shadows and secrets he had yet to uncover. Little did Jack know, his meeting with Trevor Sinclair would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge everything he believed about himself, but also expose a web of deceit that reached to the highest levels of power in the city. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the sleek black sedan as it wound its way through the bustling streets of Manhattan. Jack sat in the back, his fingers absently tracing the outline of the envelope in his jacket pocket. The weight of the cash inside felt like a lead weight, a constant reminder of the gravity of his mission. The car pulled up to a nondescript building in the meatpacking district. "We're here, Mr. Henderson," the driver announced, his voice startling Jack from his thoughts. "Thank you," Jack replied, surprised at how steady his voice sounded despite the nerves roiling in his stomach. "Wait for me here, please." Stepping out onto the sidewalk, Jack took a deep breath of the cool night air. The meeting spot was a trendy rooftop bar, chosen for its blend of exclusivity and anonymity. As he rode the elevator up, he ran through the details of his cover story one last time. The rooftop was a chic oasis above the city, string lights twinkling overhead and the murmur of conversation mixing with soft jazz. Jack scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for the face he'd memorized from the photo, Trevor Sinclair. He spotted him at a corner table, nursing a drink and nervously glancing around. Jack approached, his heart pounding but his exterior calm. "Mr. Sinclair?" he said quietly as he reached the table. "I believe we have a mutual friend." Sinclair's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "You're Blackwood's man?" he whispered. Jack nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I have what we discussed," he said, patting his jacket pocket meaningfully. Sinclair leaned in, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "Listen, before we do this, you need to know. It's bigger than Blackwood thinks. The conspiracy, it goes deeper. There are people involved that dash." Suddenly, Sinclair's face went pale. His eyes darted to something over Jack's shoulder, and before Jack could react, Sinclair was on his feet. "We've been made," he hissed. "Meet me at the secondary location. 1 hour." With that, Sinclair disappeared into the crowd, leaving Jack stunned and confused. He turned, trying to see what had spooked Sinclair, but saw only the usual mix of well-heeled patrons enjoying their evening. Heart racing, Jack made his way back to the elevator, fighting the urge to run. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of 2 men in dark suits entering the rooftop, their eyes scanning the crowd intently. Back in the car, Jack's mind was reeling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Who were those men? And what did Sinclair mean about the conspiracy being bigger than they thought? "Where to, Mr. Henderson?" the driver asked, snapping Jack back to reality. Jack hesitated. He should call Blackwood, report what happened. But something held him back. Sinclair's warning echoed in his mind. If the conspiracy was bigger than Blackwood knew, who could he really trust? "Take me to the East Village," Jack decided, recalling the secondary meeting location from the briefing materials. Corner of St. Mark's and Avenue A. As the car merged into traffic, Jack's phone buzzed. A text from Blackwood. "Update." Jack stared at the screen, his thumbs hovering over the keys. After a moment's hesitation, he typed, "Meeting delayed. Following up on lead. Will update soon." He hit send, then powered off the phone. Whatever was going on, he needed answers, and right now, Sinclair seemed to be the only one who could provide them. The car wound its way downtown, the glittering skyscrapers giving way to the grittier, more eclectic landscape of the East Village. Jack's mind raced with possibilities. What had he stumbled into? Was Blackwood truly innocent, or was he playing a deeper game? As they neared the meeting spot, Jack steeled himself. He was in too deep now to back out. Whatever secrets Sinclair held, whatever danger lurked in the shadows of this conspiracy, Jack knew he had to see it through. The car pulled up to the curb. "We're here, sir," the driver announced. Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. "Wait here," he instructed, stepping out onto the bustling sidewalk. The night air was thick with tension and possibility. As Jack scanned the street for any sign of Sinclair, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. In the space of a day, he had gone from unemployed construction worker to a key player in a high-stakes game of corporate intrigue. And as he stood there, on the corner of St. Mark's and Avenue A, Jack Henderson realized that his life would never be the same again. The real question was, would he survive long enough to see where this dangerous path led? The East Village bustled with its typical nighttime energy, a mix of college students, artists, and late-night revelers. Jack blended into the crowd, his expensive suit now feeling like a costume as he scanned the faces around him for any sign of Trevor Sinclair. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Jack's anxiety grew with each passing moment. Had Sinclair been caught? Was this all an elaborate setup? Just as he was about to give up, a hand grabbed his arm, pulling him into a dim alleyway. Jack's heart leapt into his throat, his fist clenching instinctively. "Easy," Sinclair's voice hissed in the darkness. "We don't have much time." As Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw the fear etched on Sinclair's face. The man looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously to the alley's entrance. "What's going on?" Jack demanded. "Who were those men at the bar?" Sinclair shook his head. "Not here. We need to move. Follow me, and for God's sake, act natural." They emerged from the alley and Sinclair led them on a winding path through the neighborhood, ducking into a small, hole-in-the-wall cafe. The place was nearly empty, save for a bored-looking barista and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Sinclair chose a table in the back corner, his back to the wall, eyes on the door. "Order something," he instructed Jack. "We need to look like we belong here." Jack complied, ordering 2 coffees. When the barista retreated, Sinclair leaned in close. "Listen carefully," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The documents I have, they don't just implicate Blackwood's rivals. They expose a whole network of corruption that goes all the way up to City Hall, maybe even higher." Jack felt his blood run cold. "What are you saying?" "Blackwood isn't innocent," Sinclair continued, his eyes never leaving the cafe's entrance. "But he's not the mastermind either. He's just another player in a much bigger game. The real power lies with a group called The Circle. Top executives, politicians, judges. They've been manipulating the market for years, using insider information to make billions." Jack's mind reeled. But why would they target Blackwood? Because he got greedy, started making moves they didn't approve of. So they decided to make an example of him. Sinclair paused as the barista brought their coffees, waiting until she was out of earshot before continuing. "But Blackwood, he's smart. He started gathering evidence, preparing for a day like this. That's where I came in." "So the documents, they don't just clear Blackwood. They implicate dozens of the most powerful people in the city." Sinclair's hand shook as he reached for his coffee. "That's why they're after me. If this information gets out, it'll bring down the whole house of cards." Jack sat back, his mind spinning. He'd thought he was helping to clear an innocent man's name. Now he found himself in the middle of a conspiracy that threatened to shake the foundations of New York's power structure. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked. "Why trust me?" Sinclair's eyes met Jack's, filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. "Because I need help. I can't do this alone anymore. They're closing in and I'm scared, Henderson. These people, they'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets." Before Jack could respond, Sinclair tensed, his eyes fixed on something over Jack's shoulder. "We've been here too long," he muttered. "We need to move. Now." As they stood to leave, Jack caught a glimpse of two men entering the cafe, the same ones from the rooftop bar. Their eyes scanned the room, locking onto Sinclair. "Run!" Sinclair yelled, shoving Jack towards the back of the cafe. They burst through the kitchen, startling the staff, and out a back door into another alley. The sound of footsteps and shouts followed close behind. As they ran through the maze-like streets of the East Village, Jack's mind raced. Who could he trust? Blackwood? The police? Or was he truly alone in this now? The city that had always been his home now felt like a dangerous, alien landscape. Every shadow could hide a threat, every passerby a potential enemy. As they rounded another corner, Sinclair suddenly stumbled, clutching his chest. I can't keep running," he gasped. Jack looked back, hearing the footsteps getting closer. In that moment, he had to make a choice, one that would determine not just his fate, but potentially the fate of the entire city. With the sounds of pursuit growing louder and Sinclair's labored breathing beside him, Jack Henderson prepared to make a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life and plunge him even deeper into a world of danger, deceit, and power he never knew existed. The footsteps grew louder as Jack made his decision. He couldn't abandon Sinclair now, not when he was this close to uncovering the truth. "Come on," Jack growled, grabbing Sinclair's arm and slinging it over his shoulder. "We're getting out of here together." Half dragging Sinclair, Jack spotted a fire escape on a nearby building. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, he helped Sinclair climb, the metal stairs clanging beneath their feet as they ascended. They reached the rooftop just as their pursuers rounded the corner below. Jack's construction experience kicked in as he quickly assessed their options. "This way," he whispered, leading Sinclair across the rooftop to an adjacent building with a slightly lower roof. "We can't jump that," Sinclair wheezed, his face pale with exertion and fear. "We're not jumping," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the rooftop. He spotted what he was looking for, a long piece of scaffolding plank, likely left behind by workers. "We're going to bridge the gap." Working quickly, Jack positioned the plank between the two buildings. "It'll hold," he assured Sinclair, though his own heart was racing. "I've walked narrower beams than this 6 stories up. Just don't look down." As shouts echoed from the fire escape, Jack guided Sinclair across the makeshift bridge. They made it to the other roof just as their pursuers emerged on the rooftop behind them. Jack quickly pulled the plank back, buying them precious seconds. They raced across the new rooftop, descending another fire escape into a different alley. The sounds of pursuit faded as they melted into the busy streets of the Lower East Side. "We need a place to hide, to regroup," Jack said, supporting the still-winded Sinclair. Sinclair nodded weakly. "I know a place. Old building my company used to own. Should be empty now." Following Sinclair's directions, they made their way to a nondescript office building that had seen better days. Using a code he swore hadn't been changed, Sinclair got them inside and up to an empty floor. As they caught their breath in the dusty, abandoned office space, Jack's mind raced. "Okay," he said finally. "I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. What exactly is in those documents, and why is it worth killing for?" Sinclair slumped into an old office chair, looking utterly exhausted. "It's not just financial records," he began. "There are emails, meeting minutes, recordings, evidence of collusion between CEOs, judges, even the mayor's office. They've been manipulating everything from real estate deals to judicial appointments." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a flash drive. "It's all here. Names, dates, transaction records. Enough to bring down half of Wall Street and most of City Hall." Jack stared at the small device, scarcely believing that something so small could hold such explosive information. "Why haven't you gone public with this? Or to the FBI?" Sinclair laughed bitterly. "You think they're not involved? The corruption goes deep, Henderson. I didn't know who I could trust. That's why I agreed to Blackwood's deal. I thought he was different." A heavy silence fell between them. Jack's world had been turned upside down in the span of 24 hours. He'd gone from worrying about making rent to being in possession of information that could reshape the power structure of the entire city. "So what now?" Jack asked, the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. Sinclair held out the flash drive. "Now it's your choice. I'm a liability. They know my face, my history. But you're still a ghost in this. You could disappear with this. Take it to someone who can use it." As Jack reached for the drive, a noise from the hallway made them both freeze. The sound of footsteps, trying to be quiet but echoing in the empty building, reached their ears. They'd been found. Jack's hand closed around the flash drive as he and Sinclair shared a look of panic. They were trapped, cornered in an empty office building with nowhere left to run. In that moment, Jack Henderson realized that his next decision wouldn't just determine his fate, but potentially the fate of the entire city. With the weight of the flash drive in his hand and the sound of approaching danger in his ears, he prepared to make a choice that would change everything. Jack's mind raced as the footsteps drew closer. He quickly scanned the room, his construction worker instincts kicking in as he assessed their limited options. "The ceiling," he whispered urgently to Sinclair. "There's a maintenance hatch for the HVAC system. We can hide in the ductwork." Without waiting for a response, Jack dragged a desk beneath the hatch and climbed up. His fingers worked quickly, loosening the screws. Years of manual labor had prepared him for this moment, though he never could have imagined the circumstances. As the hatch swung open, the doorknob to the office began to turn. Jack hoisted himself up, then reached down to pull Sinclair into the narrow space just as the door burst open. They lay still in the dusty ductwork, barely daring to breathe as footsteps echoed in the room below. Jack's hand clenched tightly around the flash drive, acutely aware of its importance. "They have to be here somewhere," a gruff voice said. "Search every inch of this floor." For what felt like hours, Jack and Sinclair remained motionless as their pursuers tore the office apart. Finally, after a heated argument about whether to check the other floors, the footsteps receded. Jack waited several more minutes before whispering, "I think they're gone. We need to move." Carefully, they made their way through the ductwork, emerging on a different floor of the building. As they crept towards the stairwell, Sinclair grabbed Jack's arm. "We can't keep running," he said, his face etched with exhaustion and fear. "They'll find us eventually. We need to do something with that information. Jack nodded, the weight of their situation settling on him. I have an idea, he said slowly, but it's risky. We need to get to a public place, somewhere with witnesses and cameras. Sinclair's eyes widened as he realized Jack's plan. You want to go public? Right now? Not exactly, Jack replied, but we need leverage, and the threat of exposure might be our only card left to play. They made their way cautiously out of the building, blending into the late-night crowd of the city. Jack led them to a 24-hour diner, brightly lit and bustling even at this late hour. As they settled into a booth, Jack pulled out his phone. I'm going to call Blackwood, he said. Put him on speaker. Whatever happens, we need a record of this conversation. Sinclair nodded nervously as Jack dialed. After 2 rings, Blackwood's voice came through, tense and irritated. Henderson? Where the hell have you been? Did you make the exchange? Jack took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwood, I'm with Trevor Sinclair right now. We need to talk, and you need to listen very carefully. There was a pause on the other end. When Blackwood spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. What's going on, Henderson? I know everything, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. About the circle, about the corruption, all of it. Sinclair showed me the evidence. Another pause, longer this time. You have no idea what you're getting into, Henderson, Blackwood finally said. Maybe not, Jack replied, but I know enough to be dangerous. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off your men. You're going to ensure our safety. And then we're going to meet, all of us, to discuss how this plays out. Or what? Blackwood's voice was cold. Jack locked eyes with Sinclair, who nodded encouragingly. Or the information goes public. All of it. I've already set up a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me or Sinclair, every major news outlet and law enforcement agency gets a copy. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack could almost hear the gears turning in Blackwood's head, calculating the risks and possibilities. Finally, Blackwood spoke. Fine. Where and when? Jack gave him the address of the diner. 1 hour. Come alone or the deal's off. As he ended the call, Jack slumped back in the booth, the adrenaline that had been sustaining him starting to fade. Sinclair looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. You just bluffed one of the most powerful men in New York, he said quietly. Jack managed a weak smile. Let's hope it was enough. As they waited, nursing cups of coffee and watching the door, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had stepped into a world far beyond anything he had ever known, and there would be no going back. In 1 hour, he would be face to face with Robert Blackwood, armed with nothing but the truth and his wits. The fate of not just his own life, but potentially the entire city, hung in the balance. The diner's clock ticked steadily, counting down to a confrontation that would change everything. Jack Henderson, former construction worker turned unwitting player in a game of power and corruption, steeled himself for what was to come. The hour crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jack and Sinclair sat in tense silence, their eyes darting between the diner's entrance and the slowly ticking clock. The flash drive felt like a hot coal in Jack's pocket, its weight far greater than its small size would suggest. At precisely 3 a.m., the bell above the diner's door chimed. Robert Blackwood strode in, his expensive suit out of place among the night shift workers and early morning regulars. His eyes scanned the room, quickly locking onto Jack and Sinclair. As Blackwood slid into the booth across from them, Jack noted the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. The billionaire looked like a man under immense pressure. Well, gentlemen, Blackwood said, his voice low and controlled. You've certainly made things interesting. Jack leaned forward, keeping his voice equally quiet. Let's cut to the chase, Mr. Blackwood. We know about the circle. We know about the corruption, the market manipulation, all of it. What we don't know is where you really stand in all this. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. And what exactly do you think you know, Mr. Henderson? Sinclair spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. Everything. The backroom deals with the mayor's office, the rigged judicial appointments, the insider trading network. It's all documented. A flicker of something, fear, respect, crossed Blackwood's face. He leaned back, studying them both carefully. You have no idea the forces you're dealing with, he said finally. This goes beyond me, beyond any one person or company. Then help us understand, Jack pressed. You brought me into this, Mr. Blackwood. I think I deserve the truth. Blackwood was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed heavily. The circle isn't just about making money. It's about control. Control of the markets, of politics, of the very fabric of this city. I was a part of it, yes, but I wanted out. Why? Jack asked. Because I saw where it was heading, Blackwood replied. The level of corruption, the disregard for the law, it was becoming unsustainable. I started gathering evidence, preparing for the day when it would all come crashing down. Sinclair leaned in. So why target you? Why the insider trading accusations? Because they knew I was a threat, Blackwood said bitterly. They decided to make an example of me, to show what happens to those who try to break away. Jack's mind raced, trying to process this new information. So what now? We have the evidence. We could bring this whole thing down. Blackwood shook his head. It's not that simple. The circle has people everywhere, in the media, in law enforcement, in the courts. If we move too quickly, they'll bury the evidence and us along with it. A heavy silence fell over the booth. The weight of the situation pressed down on them all, the enormity of what they were up against becoming clear. Finally, Jack spoke. We need a plan, a way to release the information that they can't control or suppress. Blackwood nodded slowly. I might have an idea, but it's risky, and it will require perfect timing and execution. As Blackwood began to outline his plan, Jack felt a mix of excitement and terror. They were about to take on some of the most powerful people in the country, armed with nothing but the truth and their wits. Suddenly, Jack noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Two men in dark suits had entered the diner, their eyes scanning the room with purpose. We've got company, Jack muttered, tensing up. Blackwood glanced over his shoulder, his face hardening. It seems the circle isn't taking any chances, he said quietly. Gentlemen, I hope you're ready, because from this moment on, we're at war. As the men in suits approached their booth, Jack realized that the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but potentially the fate of the entire city. With the flash drive burning a hole in his pocket and allies he wasn't sure he could trust by his side, Jack Henderson prepared to face whatever came next. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the two men in suits approached, Jack's mind raced, searching for a way out. Blackwood, however, seemed unnaturally calm. Gentlemen, Blackwood said loudly, standing to greet the newcomers. Right on time. Please join us. Jack and Sinclair exchanged confused glances as Blackwood gestured for the men to sit. Henderson, Sinclair, meet David Chun and Marcus Rodriguez. There with the FBI's white-collar crime division. The revelation hit Jack like a thunderbolt. He stared at Blackwood, trying to process this new development. Chun spoke first, his voice low and urgent. Mr. Blackwood has been working with us for months, gathering evidence on the circle. When he contacted us about your situation, we knew we had to move quickly. Rodriguez nodded, his eyes scanning the diner. This location isn't secure. We need to move you all to a safe house immediately. As they stood to leave, Jack grabbed Blackwood's arm. You could have told us, he hissed. Blackwood's face was grim. I needed your genuine reactions. The circle has eyes and ears everywhere. If you had known about the FBI involvement, it might have tipped them off. They exited the diner, piling into an unmarked van. As they drove through the pre-dawn streets of New York, Rodriguez briefed them on the situation. We've been building a case against the circle for years, but we've never had enough concrete evidence to move against them. What you have, he nodded to the flash drive in Jack's possession, could be the key to bringing down the entire network. Chun continued, but we need to move carefully. The circle's influence runs deep. We can't risk them burying this or spinning it in their favor. As the van wound its way out of the city, Jack's mind reeled with the implications. He had stumbled into something far bigger than he could have imagined, and now he was at the center of an operation that could reshape the power structures of an entire city, maybe even the country. They arrived at a nondescript house in the suburbs. Inside, a team of FBI analysts was already set up, ready to go through the data on the flash drive. As Sinclair worked with the analysts, explaining the context of various documents, Blackwood pulled Jack aside. "I owe you an apology, Henderson," he said quietly. "I put you in an impossible situation, but I need you to understand what we're doing here. It's bigger than any one of us. The corruption, the manipulation, it's eating away at the very foundations of our society." Jack nodded slowly, still processing everything. "So what happens now?" Blackwood's eyes gleamed with a mix of determination and something that looked almost like fear. "Now we prepare for war. The Circle won't go down without a fight. They'll use every resource at their disposal to discredit us, to bury the truth." "And how do we fight back?" Jack asked. "With the truth," Blackwood replied. "We're going to shine a light so bright on their activities that they'll have nowhere to hide. But it won't be easy, and it won't be safe." As if on cue, Rodriguez approached them, his face grave. "We've got a problem. Our secure channels have been compromised. Someone high up in the Bureau is feeding information to the Circle. We need to assume they know about this safe house." The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Agents began packing up equipment. Sinclair clutched the flash drive protectively, and Blackwood's face hardened with resolve. "We need a new plan," Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Something they won't expect." All eyes turned to Jack. In the span of a few days, he had gone from unemployed construction worker to a key player in what might be the most significant corruption case in American history. As the weight of expectations settled on his shoulders, Jack realized that everything, his life, the lives of those around him, and the future of the city he called home, now hung in the balance. Whatever came next would change everything. With the sound of approaching sirens in the distance and the knowledge that they were now hunted by both sides of the law, Jack Henderson steeled himself for what promised to be the most dangerous and important chapter of his life. The endgame was approaching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the sirens grew louder, Jack's construction worker instincts kicked in. He was used to thinking on his feet, finding unconventional solutions to complex problems. "The subway," he said suddenly, causing everyone to turn and look at him. "There's an old, abandoned subway station not far from here. I worked on a renovation project near it a few years back. It's off the grid, hard to access. We could use it as a temporary base." Blackwood's eyes lit up. "Brilliant, Henderson. Chen. Rodriguez, can you create a diversion? Buy us some time." The FBI agents nodded grimly. "We'll hold them off as long as we can," Chen said. "But you need to move fast." As the agents prepared to face whatever was coming, Jack led Blackwood and Sinclair out through a back door. They moved quickly through suburban streets, keeping to the shadows. "Once we're in the subway, what's the plan?" Sinclair asked, clutching the precious flash drive. Blackwood's face was set with determination. "We go public. Not through traditional channels, they're too easily controlled. We need to use social media, independent news sites, everything we can to get the information out there quickly and widely." They reached the hidden entrance to the abandoned station, concealed behind overgrown vegetation. Jack pried open the rusty gate, and they descended into the darkness. The station was a time capsule, dusty Art Deco tiles and forgotten advertisements lining the walls. They set up a makeshift command center using their phones and a laptop Blackwood had grabbed on their way out. "Okay," Jack said, taking charge. "Sinclair, start uploading that data to secure cloud storage. Blackwood, use your contacts, journalists, bloggers, anyone who can help spread this information quickly." As they worked feverishly, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. "They're onto you. Circle has mobilized full force. Be careful." The next few hours were a blur of activity. They disseminated information across every platform they could access, watching in real time as the story began to spread like wildfire. Hashtags started trending. News alerts pinged on millions of phones. The story of the Circle's corruption was exploding across the internet faster than anyone could control or suppress it. But their victory was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnels sent a chill down Jack's spine. "They've found us," Blackwood said grimly. Jack looked around desperately, his eyes landing on an old service tunnel. "This way," he whispered urgently. They ran through the narrow passage, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning through the bowels of the city. Finally, they emerged into daylight, finding themselves in an abandoned lot in a rundown part of town. But their relief was short-lived. Cars screeched to a halt around them, men in suits pouring out with guns drawn. Jack's heart sank as he recognized some of the faces, high-ranking police officers, a judge he'd seen on TV, even a well-known senator. The Circle had caught up with them. As they stood surrounded, Blackwood stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and defiant. "It's over. The information is out there. You can't bury this anymore." A distinguished-looking man, whom Jack recognized as the city's mayor, stepped forward. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "The chaos you've unleashed." But before he could continue, the lot was suddenly flooded with light. Helicopters roared overhead, and a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "This is the FBI. Everyone put your hands where we can see them." In the ensuing chaos, Jack watched as members of the Circle were arrested one by one. Chun and Rodriguez appeared, looking battered but triumphant. "You did it," Chun said, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Your information gave us everything we needed to move against them all at once." As the dust settled, Jack found himself standing with Blackwood and Sinclair, watching as the most powerful corruption ring in the city's history was dismantled before their eyes. "What happens now?" Jack asked, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Blackwood smiled tiredly. "Now we rebuild. The city will need good people to help restore faith in its institutions. People like you, Henderson." Jack looked out over the city skyline, the rising sun casting a golden glow over the buildings. In the span of a few days, his life had changed beyond recognition. He had faced danger, uncovered truth, and played a part in changing the course of history. As reporters began to swarm the scene, clamoring for statements, Jack realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter for him, for the city, and for all those who believed in the power of truth and justice. Jack Henderson, once an ordinary construction worker, now stood at the dawn of a new era. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that one person, standing up for what's right, could indeed change the world. The city awakened to a new day, forever changed by the courage of a few who dared to challenge the powerful and bring light to the darkness. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.